it became a global poverty action network of 500 employees. And I think there's similar models of this that exist just with NGOs, our NGO, Engineers Without Borders. And I'll put a question at the end of this. We moved from just a couple hundred in 2002 to over 12,000 volunteers just last year. I'm working with Engineers Without Borders in India right now, where I heard yesterday that we could have 25% of the world's children coming from India in the years ahead. Where do you see your role? We're trying to create a support group for the growth of Engineers Without Borders in India, and I think it'd be fantastic to see IBM and Siemens link up with that group. We have 180 campuses working across the US. They have the opportunity to be in the thousands, supporting millions across South Asia and Africa. So I'd like to hear maybe where you see your role in supporting your staff and supporting the NGO community.
Was that directed for me?
Siemens, IBM, each of you.
Do you want to start?
Well, we have 93,000 employees, I think, in India right now. It's our biggest growth area. A number of them are computer science engineers or some traditional engineers. And one of the things that we've looked at, especially with the Corporate Service Corps, there's been a number that have been deployed in India itself, working on various problems, sometimes not related to the environment, but a lot of them are environmental issues. I think it's something that we should probably take offline. We've had a number of discussions, I've had a number of discussions with our corporate team, the philanthropic part, to actually interlock with Engineers Without Borders. We work with universities around the world, as do most major international companies, and most of them, many of them, have active groups in Engineers Without Borders, and a lot of those university alumni are in IBM as well. So I think there's a possible link there that makes a lot of sense.
From a Siemens perspective, the first thing I would say is that we always try to do our business locally. So we too have thousands of employees in India and China, Brazil. I'd love to hear more about what you're doing so I understand it better, to understand how we can link up. Because one of the big challenges we have is bringing well-trained young engineers up to speed in our technology very quickly and locally. And I'd love to hear some more from you. Maybe we can exchange cards.
Go ahead, please.
Yes, I'm Professor Yapidakis from Cooper Union in New York. I'm glad that you mentioned the integrated system and the energy problem, because I've been talking about this for 30, 40 years. And yesterday, actually, I brought this up about the integration of wastewater-water approach, especially in countries where they don't have that much water and they lack, and at the same time, they do it like in the advanced countries of making some clean water and then just dumping it instead of trying to recycle it or reuse it. But, I mean, even in big countries like the United States, advanced in California that you mentioned, about 15% only of the water that they bring over the Rockies is being recycled. So that's a shame, especially if you're looking at the energy point of it. So in big countries, I think, comment on that there's need for government intervention to push for this recycling and reuse of the wastewater. And for the other countries, the organizations who get involved with there, they should approach it as an integrated program instead of just trying to get some clean water and then try to figure out how the dirty water controls the water supplies. But from the energy point of view, because I have for some years now looking into this, in the big treatment plants that we have, let's say New York City, you have 1.6 billion gallons of water every day being passing through. That's a lot of hydrodynamic energy being wasted after they produce energy from other sources. But we've looked all over the world, including China. There is no small hydroturbines that have been manufactured because nobody really cares about these kind of things. Everybody's looking at huge projects. So that's one area that I think that industry should look at. So I don't know what your experience is with Siemens or in Germany.
First of all, I think there's I can talk about the water recycle, the turbine issues a little bit outside my area of expertise, but With water reuse, it's almost always a big educational issue. And it was real interesting in Singapore, the way they did that. When they went to reusing their wastewater, they had a pep rally at the stadium, and they all toasted with a bottle of water that was produced from the recycled process. But I think it's an educational process to make people understand that the water they're getting is probably better than what's coming in from the river. The second thing I think people really need to think that we really need to always be concerned with, particularly if desalination is the option, water reuse is significantly less expensive, and particularly from an energy conservation standpoint. So if there's wastewater available, it's almost always the right answer from a technology perspective and a life cycle cost perspective to recycle that, to purify and recycle that water as opposed to desalination. But I think it's an educational process.
Last question back there, please.
Hello. My name is Kristen Downs, and I'm a master's student at Johns Hopkins University. Dr. Nunes, I was wondering, you spoke a lot about the optimization challenges of bringing together data management from disparate sources. And you had also mentioned the challenges of information sharing. And I was wondering if you could elaborate on the information sharing aspect of bringing different users who may not be used to talking together, let's say, whether that's in a watershed or different things like that, and initiatives that are working on that side toward which is necessary to be able to bring the available information together.
It's a great question because, as someone said earlier, this really isn't a technology issue. The technology exists for the most part to solve a lot of these problems, maybe not all of them, but a lot. It really does become a social issue to some extent. And a great example related to the work that IBM is doing in Smarter Cities is a project that we launched in Peterborough in the UK. It was in the press about 3 weeks ago. And part of the approach that we took there, I think, is very relevant to what we're doing in the water sector as well. This one happened to be with a city with about 10 different organizations in a city. So you can see already it's compounded because of the complexity of dealing with different departments in the city. But on a very simple analogy, you can imagine, people who are doing street reconstruction and people who are doing water maintenance, should be talking to each other. And that's not always the case, as we found out in a number of examples. But a lot of what we're approaching here is to very simply pull together what information is available and start to have them sit around the table with each other and talk about the information that they are willing to share, at least on the surface, because often what we find is they come to the table in a very protective mode. I really don't want anyone to see this data, but when they see the value of sharing the data and how somebody else might use that data and how they might help them to solve part of the problem that they're facing, it turns the discussion around. It is a very challenging process, I guess is the right way to put it, depending on the willingness of the participants to share the information, of course. And I will just say it's part of our consulting program in IBM is to really understand how you might approach it and how you do it without, imposing that structure on an organization, because it's not going to happen unless you have the participants willing to share information and unless they see the value in sharing it and see a bigger outcome from it. So it's an interesting combination of technology and social experimentation. But great question.
Thank you, Sharon. I'd like to thank all the panelists for valuable contribution they have had today. And please join me acknowledging that contribution. As I mentioned, we have a very special present to you just before lunch. It's going to be a short presentation by Mr. Nurullah Said Yakan from City of Ankara regarding the recent award they have received.